And this is just like an engine oil pressure test. So it's a test procedure. So I'll say engine oil pressure test 2022, whoops. And do that. So we give it some test ID. Maybe that's scanned with the barcode scanner. Maybe that's the serial number of the item, what have you. Now you can see we're not using this batch execution, the queue, and adding it there. We're just doing it directly in here.
Right.
So there's about half a dozen lines of script on this button that say, hey, has this ID been used before? No, it hasn't. Go ahead and start my recipe for me. So here's a procedure. It's interactive with the user, steps the user through this. This is fantastic if you have procedures that you want to record the details of. If you have training issues, like you mentioned earlier,
Right.
or you have, you know, it's a procedure, it doesn't happen that often. It's like an exception once in a while. And when it comes up, nobody remembers how to actually handle that procedure, and you want it handled in a consistent way. So it's all really about consistency here. So the cool part about this is what's seen in here or entered in here can be mapped to batch parameters.
Okay.
And batch parameters can then be mapped to tags. So you can pull from the PLC all the way up to here, or you can write in here and go all the way down to PLC or any portion of that. So in this case, I'm just checking off some items here, and it's a manual entry. Maybe this comes from equipment in the field. Like I mentioned, I'm going to put a pressure value in that is intentionally low here. So we're going to fail this test basically. And we're going to do this a couple times, and we'll see what happens each time. So first test failed. Hey, here's a couple low-hanging fruit items to check. Okay, so we'll go ahead and check those off. And it takes us back to test again. Okay, so we'll do that. And I'm going to intentionally fail again. And now, oh, guess what? Now you're going to remove the oil pan. You're going to change the oil pump. You know, more extensive corrective action. Takes us back. Okay. And we could have any number of those. Put a higher value in here and pass the test. And now it says, okay, test passed. Go ahead and remove the pressure gauge. And we're done. So that is just, has nothing to do with liquid or powder processing, right? Doesn't even involve a PLC if you don't want it to. So this is strictly procedure. Now you can have a mixture between the two. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But so let's take a look at the recipe that controlled that. So demo engine oil pressure test. Let's go ahead and edit that. And there's our unit procedure. We did it at our test fixture. And we see, let me clean that up a little bit. We see the steps here. So we started out and we did this first step, this first phase, first building block, whatever you want to call it. And then when we were done, we went through a decision tree based on the results. So in this oil pressure test, we actually have a parameter called pressure recording. So that's a batch parameter. So I want to pull up the document that's the instructions for the operator. I can do it from right in here. I don't have to go somewhere else. So there we are. I can start, you know, typing and changing my document here. I can add new entry fields, what have you. A couple of interesting things about this. One is, and this is HTML5, which just falls right in line with perspective and all that. The images typically in a website in HTML5 are links to some other place on the server, the same server, different server, what have you. One, you can get into security issues if they're on different servers. Two is those links can get broken. How many times you pull up a web page and the image doesn't show? Okay, so broken links are a bad thing. These images we actually convert to, from the binary format that they are, we convert to a #64. We store that right in the HTML5 document. Then to take it further there, we take that HTML5 document and save it right in the recipe. So our MES objects, which are saved in the database. So our document, our images in the document, our recipe, all saved in the database, the same database. So if you had a disaster recovery situation, you restore your database, you have everything there.
Everything's there.
Yeah. And the other thing about that is when you get into versioning, which we fully support, if I create a new test procedure and call it version 2, then you know, the correct image with the correct version is maintained and in all the way down to the database. And so that is pretty powerful features, I think. And if you've ever experienced any of those types of situations, you'll probably relate to that. So this entry field here, you know, I can add entry fields just simply by selecting the type of entry field up here. It could be a checkbox, whatever, text, and put those anywhere on the screen that I want. Then I can set some properties on that entry field. And in this case, that pressure recording parameter that I mentioned back over in the recipe, and it's context sensitive based on the data type. So if I just said text, then I'd have a different option. But if that's numeric, then it's going to pull up numeric parameters. And you can set it read only if you want and all that. So
I want to point something out here, Tom.
Okay.
Because this is something that was the very first time I saw this many months ago. I looked at this and my mind wandered into, oh, we're in Designer right now and we're creating things in Designer. We're not.
We're not.
This is for the recipe author, the person who understands the process, to use the batch tool to create what that process is.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. So, you know, engineer's going to get into the Designer. You don't want operations recipe author in the Designer, right? So the engineer could create this and you could put security on it, sure. You know, but if you want operations to be able to make their own tweaks, maybe some cases, maybe you don't, but if you do, it's very common. They have a lot of changes, right?
Sure.
They can go in and tweak the way they want to. And hopefully you give them a tool, they don't run off and use spreadsheets. You know, they're using a tool that's powerful enough for them. So good point. So this is mapped to that pressure recording. So now when I come down here and these expressions, and I talked a little bit about how powerful they are, we have that, here's UP2, that's the step, and you can name that anything. It could be, you know, test or, you know, take sample or measure pressure, whatever you want to name it. It simply can do that. We auto name them when you drop them on there, so UPT is the auto name. So we get the pressure recording from that step. And if it's less than 25 and our execute count is equal to 1, meaning it's the first time we came through and we failed, we're going to come down this path over here. And a different document, we show that document. Here's the corrective actions, the low-hanging fruit ones. Then we also have if we failed and our execute count is 2. So we've gone through twice now. We're going to come down this path and here's the document for that and so on. So very simple to create. This recipe with probably very little training, your operations could create this test procedure. The screen, maybe you have the engineer create that screen. That does require going into the Designer.
So one of the things that I could do is, as a recipe author, is if the test fails 3 times, I could run a script phase, and trigger an alarm, get a QA technician or QC technician over, or my supervisor, et cetera, or have this particular piece of product go down a different line, because now we've done everything we can do on the manufacturing line. It needs to go to rework.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point there, because we have, I mean, a typical batch system, the phases involve the PLC. You want a timer, you put the timer down the PLC, you map it, you do all that. Well, we support that fully if you want a timer in the PLC, but we also have a timer up in the batch engine that you can run just in the batch engine. So I could add a timer between these steps if so desired. But we also have all kinds of other built-in phases. We want to display a message to the user. We want to run a script. You just mentioned that, right? That script might, issue an alert on the ignition alarming, or I could tie that in with a tag, either way. So if you have a longer running script though, maybe it goes to the ERP system, gets the next serial number. Maybe it goes to a database and does a call, or a web service call, or does a complex calculation. You can have a script phase in here, and the engineer can set up that script. The recipe author can just drag it over, drop it on the screen, pass in the batch parameters to that script. The script can, process, so it can pass data. And then the result, you can return multiple batch parameter values back out of the script, just in a Python dictionary.
Okay.
And those will be set into your batch parameters values.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So really good point there, Jeff.
And Tom, real quick to interrupt you here, we did get a question that came in related to this. So you talked about how you can have these entries go to a batch parameter, and then from there to a tag, and then you can do whatever you want with it. Obviously a really easy to use interface here, all from inside the client. Kishore was asking, do they still need to write anything in the function block of the controller as part of this process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's where we're a little bit different. So in this case here, where we have the test and these document phases, this does not use a controller at all. Over in when we did the process, then there was phase, add ingredient A. Well, that's involves the controller. And in that case, yes, you would write something in the controller. So keep in mind that the controller is very good at certain tasks. And one of them is high speed, cutoff of addition amounts, safety issues, all those kind of things belong in the controller. And we're not trying to replace that. So, but the batch ISA 88 standard is communicating with that controller with those blocks up here. So in that case where we had the add ingredient A, this essentially communicates with the controller. So we say add this amount, go ahead and start, and it comes back and says I'm running. And you can do other things. You can say, hey, hold or pause. It'll come back and say, I'm pausing. Okay, now restart. All these kinds of things, commands, is all part of the ISA 88 specification. And in that case, that communications with the controller. Now, let me talk about that a little bit more too, because those are done through these phases. And you can create your phases up here so we have like premix, add ingredient A. That's a phase. So there's the part here in our system, and there's the part down in the controller. All those parameters that are possible to communicate back and forth are here. So like for command, PLCs like numbers, not text. Well, we have commands to text, and we have command number, which is just an integer. And so now I can expose this down to the PLC. PLC can use that command number. Now I have that communications going. And any of these parameters I can do that with. I can add my own parameters here. So addition amount, how much to add right here. Sure. And you have the capability of saying, it's an OPC tag, so it's going to go to the controller, different options here. And when we talk about the controller, control logics are very common to use with batch, but it's not the only controller. So there's a couple different methods to interfacing with controllers. So the bulk of them is going to be like what's called PLI, phase logic interface. And there's OPC PLI. That's going to be the bulk of all the controllers out there. ControlLogix has something a little bit more special. It has what's called a CIP phase manager that you can optionally, I don't know if it's additional money or not, but you can optionally run that on your ControlLogix.
Okay.
And it sets up these phases. So you'll have a one-to-one mapping between the phase in our system and the ControlLogix. That will then, there's a PLI layer in there that you have to take this command number, and because it doesn't use command numbers, it uses instructions in the ControlLogix. So you have to say, oh, we got this command number, execute this instruction. So you have a little bit of mapping back and forth that needs to be done if you're using the CIP phase manager in the ControlLogix.
Gotcha.
That's the only one. So hopefully that answered the question there. Really
Yep,
good
Kishore.
question. Yeah.
Kishore said, fantastic, you simplified it. Thanks for answering. And one last question before you move on here. Somebody had asked specifically related to the formulas, the expressions that you were talking about. And people wanted to know, can you reference the batch parameters from inside those expressions?
Yes, absolutely. So let me show that real quick. So let's say I have this, let's go ahead and put a parameter, like a batch parameter at the high level here, and we'll say a amount. Yeah. Okay, and we specify it in the recipe. Let's say it's an integer. Okay, so we just have this parameter here. Okay, let me go back here, and over here on the ingredient A, I have this set point amount for A. I have this calculation here, so I can actually say, let's get a parameter. And this particular version on our demo server, we haven't updated it yet, doesn't have the IntelliSense, but we actually have IntelliSense for this. Whoops. And I can say, let's go back to the root level and get a amount. And so it will go get that batch parameter, put it in here and use it for this phase. But I can put, this is basically a single line of Python script. I can put other calculations in here. I can divide that by 2. I can do all kinds of stuff. So that's one spot where you can refer to any parameter with the path type of thing that I put in there. I said go back to the root level. On expressions, the same thing is true. So, and I think we do have IntelliSense here. Here's a amount. So I can reference that parameter at that root level, but I can actually go, to other, I don't recommend this, but the system will do it. I could go to other unit procedures and access parameters over there. So yes.
Very cool.
Other parameters, tags, calculations in them, script functions in here as well.
And one last follow-up question with that. In addition to pulling data from tags, parameters, things like that, if I wanted to go pull a row out of a database and use that as I'm going through these procedures, how would I do that?
Yeah, so let's see if I have that here. Let's go into a different recipe. Hopefully it's in here. So we have a script phase, and in here you can tell it what these are the predefined scripts that are the scripts we added to our demo server. But you can add any script. I'll show you where that is added. So if you have a longer running script, you don't want to be like hitting that over and over again. So it has a life cycle to it, and that might be get a value out of database row, anything like that. So this is where you would tell it to run, and the parameters here are passed into that script in a Python dictionary, and then you can return out of that script the parameters, the values that you want to set within your batch recipe. So that's where you would refer to that. And you saw there was log was one of them. So let me go to the designer. And let me go up to MES scripts here. Batch scripts, here's the log one. So I can say batch parameters, get the message, and then, you know, put it out to the logger. And then I can say return, you know, whatever parameter I have defined over in the batch system and, you know, a value. Oops. Something like that. So that would, you know,
Right, so they
be
could
able to set
call
values back.
system.db.run name query here, you know, run prep query and bring back that row in SQL and then just pass that back to the parameter in the return statement there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or stored procedure call, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we kind of opened the floodgates here for questions. So thank you everybody for posting your questions. We're going to get back on track with the presentation here, but we will get to more questions at the end. And so stay tuned. But Tom, sorry to take you down some rabbit holes there, but back to you guys.
No, great questions and good timing on some of those too. So
stay connected by following us on social media and subscribing to our weekly news feed and monthly podcast. But thanks so much, Tom, Jeff, great presentation. Really excited to see how customers use this to revolutionize their processes. And so with that, we'll wrap up for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, take care. Bye.